Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you again for attending today's webinar. Joining me will be Dave Branscombe from Microsoft. And Dave, if you don't mind, we'll advance the slide and get started. So today's topic, if this is your first time, we'll be chatting about Windows 365, a new offering from Microsoft, and really talking about if it's a fit or not for your organization. We'll deep into that a little deeper, dive in a little deeper later on. As we advance the slide, I'll mention to you that if you have any questions along the way, please do put them in the chat window. If we are unable to get to those during the event, they are recorded, so we'll get back to you for sure. So as always, our goals provide insight and guidance to address any challenges you might have. As I mentioned, we'll determine if Windows 365 isn't relevant to what you're trying to accomplish. Can it help solve a business need? And certainly, our goal always is to demonstrate our ability to partner with you on some of these important initiatives. So introductions, we'll get to that in a moment. We've talked about this, understanding Windows 365. Really big for me. Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop. What are those use cases? Dave will go over that in a little detail during the presentation. And I can share with you, we're going through that assessment with a client today. We will see use cases where W365 makes sense and where frankly it doesn't, and perhaps Azure Virtual Desktop does. All set, Dave. So what are we seeing in the field today? What are some of those drivers? It's clear that, COVID, we all know this, changed the way people work. We now have to address elastic and hybrid and remote workforces, and those are the norm. This has been going on forever, and it's, I think, even more prevalent today. It's tough to understand what capital assets look like. Very often we've underutilized or over-provisioned or oversubscribed our capital expenses, or even worse, geez, we don't have enough and we have to try to go back to the well a second time. Usually not something that works in our favor. There's absolutely an overall continued emphasis on operational cost models. I'm sure everyone on this call is subscribing to 365, probably doing Salesforce or other sales types, SaaS applications. So that will continue as we move forward in the industry for sure. And we're at an important juncture. Not all use cases are equal. Perhaps hybrid or cloud or the data center makes sense. We're finding it's probably that hybrid approach that is optimal for our clients. So as we move forward, maybe some of the stuff that you guys answered in our registration questions. So does your organization experience frequent employee turnover or have seasonal flux? Half of you are saying yes. So great use cases might be retail shops, for example. Are you at a point to need to refresh desktops or devices? Almost half of you saying we're at that point. And there's a great use case, right? That's what we just talked about. We're having to look at capital investments, depreciation of those. What is perhaps a different strategy? And do you need to reevaluate your current hybrid work strategy? We have that first slide showing everyone back to work and what their preference is. So does that mean you're trying to now to address that, and how are you going to provide that end user experience? So really just this is really down to the end user management of, but would it be nice to have a very specific RAM storage capability for different user groups in the organization, perhaps administrative versus sales versus design, if we could try to standardize that. And this goes back to the operational piece we were talking about. Is it easier for perhaps to go to finance and say, hey, our end user computing is going to cost X per month versus every 3 years going to look at capital budget and what the current processes are and dealing with things like today, the unpredictability and lack of availability of components. So those are all things that we can try to address through this operational model. So before we get into the content, for those that are new to these webinar series, I'll give just a brief overview of New Era. So you can see really fantastic growth over the last few years, 60 offices worldwide, approaching 3,000 employees. And over to the right, you can see some of the solutions and services available. Dave, if you don't mind, go to the next screen. We'll talk about those in a visual context. Today, I'll be focusing on the data networking practice, which is our Microsoft practice. But I can tell you from experience, really all of these groups are in play when it comes to today's work environment. Almost every opportunity that involves our data networking is also involving our security practice, our collaboration practice. We also have a very strong overall managed and cloud division. And at the heart of it, we are a professional services organization. So in all of these, from initial design consultation throughout the project and post support, we'll have those resources to be with you every step of the way. Focusing on Microsoft, again, that's today's content. Just know really that in the entire stack, we can provide those resources to you. I've sort of highlighted a few here. No doubt, Power BI, Power Apps is very, very strong today. Our SharePoint practice and 365, the modern workplace continues to be really a driver. And I think Dave, on the next slide, we'll also talk about that. I would say as we migrate towards this modern workplace, you'll see as David advances, you'll see the security and governance as always being really a focal of what we're trying to do. So regardless of the different product set, we're always looking at security and always looking at governance when looking to deploy these solutions. And with that, I do want to introduce Dave Branscombe from Microsoft. Dave is a great resource, great partner. Dave, I'll call you a friend as well, if that's okay. But Dave, thanks for joining today, and I really look forward to today's content.
Thank you, Joe. And yes, you can call me a friend. That's fine. So I'm Dave Branscombe. I'm based out of Raleigh, North Carolina, and I'm a cloud security architect with Microsoft. I've been working with partners for about 5 years now, and been with Microsoft as a whole for about 14 years of my career. So let's talk about Windows 365 and what the use case is. So you probably heard some of the announcements around Windows 365 and maybe had some questions in your mind. What's the use case here? Why would I be using Windows 365 versus Azure Virtual Desktop, for example? So let's kind of delve a little bit more into some of the topics that Joe was mentioning there a few minutes ago. So we're hopefully coming, out on the other end of the pandemic here in a short time period. And what we've seen over the course of the last 22 months, I think it's been, is that there's been a definite shift in mindset with workers and with companies. So most people realize that flexible work lets you do more. It gives you more options in terms of how you live your life and develop that work-life balance. And people really don't want that to end. So that's what the data tells us. So Microsoft did a study. It's a work trend index, and we did this survey with about 30,000 people across 31 countries. And what you see here on the on the screen is some of the highlights from that report. 73% of workers say they want flexible remote work options. Interestingly, at the same time, 67% of employees tell us they want more in-person collaboration post-pandemic. So people want to work remotely, but also have more in-person collaboration, which is kind of a funny hybrid worker type paradox. And we've also heard from 80% of managers saying that they expect they're going to have to modify or be a little more flexible about their work from home policies once the pandemic has kind of run its course. So what we see here is employees saying they want more flexible remote work options, and at the same time saying that they want more in-person collaboration, and managers saying, yes, we have to figure out a way to accommodate that. So how does that happen? Joe alluded to a couple of the points that are brought up here. So if we're going to support these hybrid work scenarios and these policies and in general, a more flexible work type of policy, it means we're going to have to be more elastic in the way that we provide services to the employees that are consuming those services. We have to take into account things like temporary or seasonal workers. Joe alluded to the holiday workers in retail, and that's definitely an area that is coming up. Many organizations do surge hiring for scenarios like that. And then people working across an organization very often may be using company-owned devices as well as personal devices. The kind of bring your own device model is becoming more and more prevalent. You have scenarios where you've got interns or contractors that are doing temporary work on behalf of an organization, and they may be bringing their own PC and joining the organization as part of the work that they're accomplishing. And so all these things create challenges with security of data, security of the devices, and securing the identities. And so many organizations are looking at this and looking at Windows 365 as a viable solution for helping to bring these types of challenges under control. So how does it do this? Well, when we talk about the challenges that come with hybrid work, one of the challenges is, how do you onboard employees? How do you provision them with new devices? When the pandemic first started, back in, I guess it was March or April of 2020, one of the challenges that presented itself very, very quickly within the first few months of the actual lockdown was getting PCs to employees. So we had situations where organizations were telling people, just take your desktop home, unplug it from underneath your desk and take it home, or take your laptop home. But then when they hired people, they had no way of getting machines to them because there was a chip shortage. So even at Microsoft, we experienced that. We were hiring, thousands of people, and we simply couldn't provision physical devices to them because they didn't exist in the supply chain. So that's a challenge that continues to exist, and one of the things that is part of that is being able to provision these devices to your end users, making sure they have the applications that they need, the line of business applications that they need, and that you have the control over those devices that's necessary. Hybrid work also creates challenges around business continuity. So are you able to take advantage of a situation and scale up, scale down very quickly in order to meet market demands? And then security and regulation is kind of an ongoing challenge for many organizations. You have to make sure that you're protecting customer data. You have to make sure that you're securing data that is required by regulatory standards that you have to abide by, and at the same time, you can't restrict users so much that they're non-productive. So these are all challenges that come along with the model of hybrid work, and one that we feel that Windows 365 can help you to meet. So in order to unlock some of those scenarios for our customers, we announced this new category of personal computing that delivers Windows 10, and now that Windows 11 is out, it will soon be available in Windows 11. The concept is the cloud PC, the cloud PC category. So the cloud PC is your personalized desktop apps, settings that you configured, content. All of this is streamed securely from the Microsoft Cloud to any device that you want. And that's a key differentiator between the cloud PC and many of the other solutions that you might be using, is that you can stream a desktop to an Android phone or to an iPad or to a Windows laptop or whatever it might be. Whatever device you like to work on, the odds are very good that you'll be able to access your cloud PC from that device. And so this is the interface that you would see. There's a video demo a little bit later on that shows you what the user experience would be, but this is how a user would interact with Windows 365. You can see that they're connecting through a web browser, and they've got multiple options, multiple cloud PCs, 3 of them there, that they're able to connect to. They have different sizing, different capabilities, and each one of those is customized to this specific user. So with Windows 365, you can assign users one PC, or as you see in the screenshot here, they can have many cloud PCs based on the type of work that they do and the computing requirements that are needed. So you can align the PCs that are available to an end user to these different configurations of compute power and storage. Now, the way that we do this is we make the experience for your end user something that is versatile. It's familiar, so people are used to working with Windows 10, and really the transition to Windows 11 is not a very big jump in terms of learning the operating system and where to click things. There's a few neat little changes, but by and large, it's a pretty easy operating system to get to know. But what this allows is for users to have their own content, their own settings, their own applications available in a cloud PC, and whenever they connect to it, all those things are still available to them. This is one of the things that makes it different from an Azure Virtual Desktop, as you'll see in just a few minutes. It's easy to deploy and manage from a single console. It is secure by design, so there's no data that's left on the end user's device. So if a user connects to their PC from an iPad or from an Android device, and that device gets stolen or compromised somehow, there's no connection to the cloud PC. So there's no data left on that device that could be stolen by an attacker. And lastly, it is scalable. It is resilient to your needs to change the size of your workforce, and even to new business scenarios that you might have to bring online and account for in your sizing. Now, one of the things that's nice about this is that it provides capabilities that are going to benefit everybody in the organization. So with Windows 365, your users are going to have access to their own personalized Windows experience. So it's going to be familiar to them. From a business perspective, you're able to size your employees' work environments properly. You don't have a glut of extra machines. They're sitting around unused, and you don't end up with situations where you need machines and don't have the capacity to purchase them or get them into the hands of your users in a timely fashion. And then from the IT team's perspective, they're able to deliver a complete service, a secure hybrid personal computing experience to their end users, and still have the benefits of simplified procurement management and ease of scalability. One of the other advantages is the integration points with the rest of Microsoft 365 services. So you have the integration with things like Azure AD, Microsoft Defender, and all the Defender products that come along with that. You have the Microsoft 365 applications, your Outlook, your Excel, Word, and so on. And then integration with Microsoft Endpoint Manager from a management perspective, being able to deploy applications and secure these cloud PCs. And the nice thing about this is that in contrast to things like Azure Virtual Desktop and maybe virtualization technologies, you don't have to have any special skill or previous experience with virtualization, because it allows IT to use the same tools you use today to manage your devices. So you can manage your physical and virtual endpoints together, side by side, in Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So there are a variety of scenarios that we've identified as being ideal for the use of Windows 365, and some of them are mentioned here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but some of the ones that have been particularly valuable that we've seen over the last year and a half are the two in the lower right. So temporary workforces and mergers and acquisitions. So clearly, there have been a lot of changes in the workforce, and as I mentioned, this offering became available very early on in the pandemic, and so a lot of customers took advantage of this to provision high performing and scalable PCs to their end users in their environment, and make sure that they had access to the applications and tools that they needed from whatever device they wanted to connect to from home. The other scenario is the mergers and acquisitions. So very often what happens in mergers and acquisitions, organizations need a way to provide seamless transition and access to applications when they are rapidly growing, when they're acquiring new companies, and those new companies need to have access to line of business applications in another company's environment. This can be a way to accomplish that without provisioning 3 or 4 different laptops to people, each one joined to a different environment, so that they can access an application that they use once a day. They can connect to that application using a Windows 365 desktop and only pay for the time that they're using it. So these are some of the key PC or the key scenarios that we're seeing from customers, but these are by far not the only ones, right? These are just the ones that have been the most unique use cases. Now, the question that often comes up is, how do I decide what I need? I've got the option of using a cloud PC, Windows 365. I've got options for doing virtual desktop infrastructure with Azure Virtual Desktop. I can do physical PCs. I can do an on-prem VDI infrastructure. So how do I decide which one is the right one for the environment? And one of the ways that we recommend that people look at deciding on their technology solution is going through kind of this thought process of am I trying to deploy something in a simple, maybe user focused way, which you see on the left-hand side with Windows 365, or Am I more interested in maybe controlling the environment and controlling the experience for end users, where perhaps Azure Virtual Desktop is the better solution? So what we mean by this is, if we take a look at Windows 365, um, it allows you, the end user, to personalize their desktop, to install the applications that they know and are familiar with onto their desktop. They can customize their backgrounds and all the little things that make their PC theirs, right? Um, the other part of this is the ability to provide per user pricing. Okay, so you license individuals for a particular size PC, and that's the licensing that they use. On the other side of the coin, you've got Azure Virtual Desktop. With Azure Virtual Desktop, in most cases, what we're looking at are environments where all the users need to have the same type of environment, and it needs to be consistent whether or not they're connecting to the same PC. So you would want to make sure that you have full control over configuration, full control over management of those devices. And then in the end, the bottom bullet point that's mentioned there is that it's consumption-based pricing rather than per user licensing. So depending on how frequently the virtual desktop is used and how that virtual desktop is sized, that's how you're going to be charged. Whereas with the Windows 365 device pricing, you charge by user for each instance that they might want to spin up. There are also two flavors of Windows 365. So if you've made the decision, we're not going to go with Azure Virtual Desktop, we're going to go with Windows 365. The next step is, which version of Windows 365? And this is usually a pretty easy decision. So if you go with the option on the left-hand side, Windows 365 Business, number one, what this is tailored to is organizations or businesses that have less than 300 users, and generally speaking, they want to manage the deployment and configuration of their Windows 365 PCs on their own. So they don't have an Azure subscription, and they can just go to windows365.com, purchase the licensing, and get things set up. It can be done very, very quickly, but you lose a number of features, and we'll get into that in a couple slides. Those features are available in the Windows 365 Enterprise. With the Windows 365 Enterprise on the right-hand side, we support an unlimited number of users. You have the ability to manage things through Endpoint Manager. The requirements are a little bit steeper, obviously. So you do have to have an Azure subscription. You have to be licensed for Windows 10, for Endpoint Manager, and Azure Active Directory P1. But if you're licensed for those things already, as probably many of you are, then this is just an add-on licensing capability. But it does provide you much more extensive control and functionality than the Windows 365 Business. So the way I would look at it is the 365 Business is really, I mean, I wouldn't use this in an environment where you've got more than 20 people that you're supporting. It simply becomes unwieldy. So if you're looking at Windows 365 Business, what are the options that you have available for the virtual PC provisioning? If we look up at the top at the form factors, in other words, how can I deliver this Windows 365 Cloud PC to my end users, you see that it can be presented to your users, whether they're using a desktop, a laptop, a tablet, or a phone, on Windows, Mac, iOS, or Android. Now, the part that is important to keep in mind is the part down at the bottom where you have the little sliders. So you have a variety of different configuration options, ranging from 8 virtual CPUs, 32 gig of RAM, 128 gig of or 512 gig of storage, all the way down to a single virtual CPU with 2 gig of RAM and 64 gig of storage. So what you would do is determine what kind of machine do my end users need? And you would provision that type of machine to them so that they have the ability to use the machine that fits their computing needs. So that's for the business SKU. You get a little bit more in terms of the SKUs that are available to you when you move up to the enterprise SKU. What is also available here, as you can see in the middle, the business SKU did not offer Windows 11 yet. Of course, at some point it will, but the Windows 365 for Enterprise will have the Windows 11 available earlier. So while you have many of the same configuration options from the sizing perspective, the compute and storage configurations down at the bottom, while those may be similar to what you have for the business licensing, what is different and dramatically so are the features that are available in each edition. So as you can see in the kind of the middle column, the lighter blue, this is what's available with the Windows 365 Business. So you can provision machines directly from the Windows365.com product page. There's no domain setup. In terms of troubleshooting the cloud PC, you can basically just reset the machine, and then you have the ability to cloud save. All the other options for the Windows 365 Business version or edition are no. And that's where the advantages of the 365 Enterprise licensing really start to shine. So things like self-serve upgrades, universal print integration. You can upload your own custom images. So if you have an image that you want to provide to your end users that has line of business applications and the management tools that you want to make available, those can be uploaded and provisioned as a Windows 365 PC. So you're able to manage your images just like you would on premises, where you'd deploy an image to a laptop. You can do something very similar with Windows 365. You have the ability to connect to on-premises. So if you have network resources that are on-premises, those can be accessed through Windows 365 Enterprise, through connectivity, through your Azure VNets and so on. And then there's a lot more troubleshooting and device management capabilities that are extended to you through the Enterprise SKU.
Hey, Dave, a quick question.
Sure.
Actually, probably going right to it right now, the license requirements, but as a CSP, New Era can help provide this licensing on a monthly basis based on usage. And I believe we can move up and down the stack relative to processor storage. So if I want to move from the 2 gigabit to the 8, that's not a problem, I assume, every month.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, you can make any changes you need. Yep.
And then the same, can a user go from Windows 365 Business to Enterprise? Can you mix and match those, or is it one or the other for the organization?
So there's nothing that would stop somebody from provisioning both in the same, or to the same user community. However, what you're essentially doing is putting the Windows 365 business users kind of on an island
Sure.
by themselves. So they're not going to have the same access to the resources that people would in the 365 Enterprise licensing. So yeah, you could do it. you might think about doing that kind of thing for maybe contractors, people that don't necessarily need the same access that your full-time employees do. But I'm not sure that that's the most efficient way to handle management of those devices, because you
Sure.
lose control over what applications you can deploy to them. You don't have the ability to upgrade applications that are line of business apps and things like that. Now, some of that stuff can be done with things like access packages in Microsoft 365, but that's a different topic. So,
Sure. Thanks for addressing and thanks for the questions, folks. Thanks, Dave.
yep. All right. This is not going to be a deep technical discussion, simply because of time, and what we're going to do is really just talk about. Hang up this phone. Okay. We're going to talk about at a very high level what's necessary to get this up and running. And what we mean here is Windows 365 for the enterprise. What are the components that are needed in order to make this work? So from a licensing perspective, if users already have Windows professional endpoints, then the licensing you see up at the top, the Windows 10 E3 plus EMS E3, or any of the M365 E3, F3, E5, or Business Premium SKUs will work. If they're not using Windows Pro on their endpoints, then Windows VDA E3 and EMS E3, or the same M365 F3, E3, F5 Business Premium. And I think that's actually a typo. I think that may need to be E5, but I'll check on that. For the enterprise, Windows 365 for enterprise, you do need an Azure subscription because you need to build a virtual network, an Azure virtual network. And that is because, as you see in the third bullet point, the Azure virtual network needs to have line of sight to domain controllers. So that domain controller can be on premises. It can be a domain controller that exists in Azure with an extended subnet or something like that. But you need to have the ability to connect to that domain controller because you want to do hybrid Azure AD join. The other piece of that is that for name resolution, you're going to need to have DNS naming set up in your domain controllers so that your your Windows 365 machines are able to resolve names on your internal network. So they need to have the ability to connect to internal DNS servers. User identities. So users will be provisioned either in Active Directory, or you can have them provisioned in Azure AD, maybe with Azure AD Connect, for example. The images, you can use the images that are built into the gallery in Windows, or you can bring your own and upload the image of your choosing up into Azure. Management, obviously, if you need the EMS SKU, you're probably going to be using Endpoint Manager, and it does support SCCM for co-management. And then from a permissioning perspective, the people that would be managing your Windows 365 desktops are your Intune service admin, and then your Azure subscription owner would be the one that would set up the network connectivity to your on-premises environment. So let's take a look at, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, Dave. I was going to make an obvious statement here. There's a lot here, and we're going to talk about more, but just knowing that the Microsoft team here at New Era, our professionals are ready to help, and we don't need to recall all this at one time. So the team's here able to walk through this process with you.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so at a very, very high level, again, we're not going to be digging into the weeds too much here. We'll touch on a few bullet points. But the high-level deployment process would look something like this. You would make sure you have an Azure subscription. As mentioned, that's a requirement. You would configure your Azure Active Directory, and that might be using Azure AD Connect. And this is to facilitate the hybrid Azure AD join process. So when you provision your Windows 365 PC, you're going to hybrid Azure AD join it to the environment so that it has connectivity to the applications in your environment. You'll manage your Windows 365 licensing in the Endpoint Manager admin portal. You'll set up any associated Azure resources, again, referring to the virtual network that has that line of sight to your domain controllers, both for name resolution as well as for domain join purposes. If you have a custom image that you want to upload into Azure to use as your Windows 365 PC that's been customized, you can do that as well. And then credentials. So both from the perspective of the users that will be using the Windows 365 PC, as well as the credentials needed to administer the Windows 365 PC environment. And we talked about what those specific roles are, the Intune Service Admin and Azure Subscription Owner. So let's talk a little bit about the identity requirements. Again, very high level. So hybrid Azure AD join. When you configure your Azure AD Connect, one of the options that you have, as you see here in the screenshot, is the ability to configure hybrid Azure AD join. What this facilitates is the ability to connect to on-premises resources, to have the device represented in your on-premise Active Directory as well as in your Azure AD, and that allows you to I don't want to say exert control over the device, but exercise control over the device through things like group policy and so on. So configuring this hybrid Azure AD join is key in the management capabilities. One of the notes there is that Azure AD join support is coming soon, so you will be able to simply Azure AD join the devices rather than having the requirement to do hybrid Azure AD join. From a networking perspective, so as I mentioned, we do want to configure a virtual network in Azure that routes to a DNS server that can resolve Active Directory records either on premises or in Azure. So that's one of the reasons why we want to make sure that we've got line of sight visibility to a domain controller. So you want to configure that virtual network to ensure that you can reach that domain controller that's hosting DNS, and you're able to resolve those Active Directory records. When you set up your Windows 365 VMs, they are joined to Active Directory, but they are still hosted in Microsoft's data centers. So you do have to have that sort of connectivity. And then there are some options, as you see in the box there. You can use ExpressRoute if that's something that you've already got set up for Office 365, for example, or for your Azure subscription if you've created a subnet that spans your on-premise to a cloud environment. Many customers have done that. Or if you've done a site-to-site VPN, which is in most cases a less expensive way of stretching that subnet between the two environments. So either way will work. It gives you that connectivity to your on-premises environment that the Windows 365 PCs require. Bandwidth costs. So customers are charged for outbound network bandwidth utilization of the cloud PCs via their Azure subscription. So it's not, I mean, it's built into the billing that you have in your Azure subscription. Any outbound connectivity that the cloud PCs require is charged directly to the Azure subscription. So the first 5 gig per month is free, and then it's about 9 cents per gig, between 5 gig and 10 terabytes per month. So realistically, most PCs are not going to be doing beyond 10 terabytes a month of outbound bandwidth. But even then, you're not being charged a significant amount per gigabyte. So the bandwidth costs are I don't want to say trivial, but because you could have hundreds of these, but they're not the majority of the expense that you would incur with a Windows 365 PC. As I've mentioned a couple times, you want to make sure that from a networking perspective, the Azure Virtual Network can route traffic to a DNS server that can resolve on-premises Active Directory records. And so this is how you would configure the VNet. You would define the in the DNS server's blade on the left-hand side of your Azure portal. You would configure a custom DNS server, and that custom DNS server would be your on-premises DNS servers. In most cases, it's an Active Directory domain controller, but it could also just be a standalone DNS server. So make sure that you have that connectivity so that you can resolve on-premises resources. So that's a very, very high level of some of the technical requirements. We didn't get into how you provision custom images and things like that. But let's talk about the licensing. So we did see the options for the licensing in those 2 slides between the business and the enterprise SKUs. What we want to do now is figure out what's the appropriate sizing based on the scenarios that I'm working with. So this is a really good slide to kind of figure out, what size PC does a typical user need in this scenario. So if you're working with users that are maybe doing frontline worker type things, maybe they're in a retail environment and they occasionally need to connect to a PC to maybe log their hours each day, or they need to check email once a day at the end of their shift or something like that, then you can probably go with the lighter PC up at the top. But then if you start having users that are doing things that are very graphics intensive or CPU intensive, down at the bottom, you might have design and engineering workstations, people that are working with designs and doing heavy graphic type of activity. You might want to go with the higher end VMs. So the same users can have multiple PCs. So you could provision a design and engineering worker with a high-end PC, but they could also have just a standard, information worker type PC that would allow them to do their typical day-to-day work, checking email, browsing the internet, those type of things that would be less expensive than the design and engineering workstation, and they could use them for different purposes. So maybe use this as kind of a guideline for figuring out which size works best for the users in the different scenarios that exist in your environment. So how do you assign the licensing to your users? So you would select a specific user, and then as you can see in the licensing tab, they will have different sizes of virtual PCs or Windows 365 PCs available to them, and you could assign that licensing to those users. So depending on the types of PCs that you want to make available to them, you would assign that license to the users. This can be done from the Azure portal, or as you see here, it can be done through an Azure AD group assignment for bulk scenarios. So let's take a look at what the end user experience is, and that's really one of the things that most organizations are concerned about. What does this look like to my end users? So the first thing we have to look at is what are the features that are available depending on how the user is connecting. So for example, if a user is connecting from an Android device, what are the things that are available and what are the things that they're not going to be able to do? So if they're connecting, as an example, from an Android phone, then things like serial port, USB, connection to printers and scanners, that's not going to be available to them using the Windows 365 PC model. Similarly with iPads, iOS devices, Mac OS in most cases, some of these things are not going to be available to them. On the other hand, if you're using Windows Desktop, you get all the features. What we're going to look at in the demo is the web portal. So the web portal allows users to connect to their Windows 365 PC with just their internet browser. So it doesn't matter what kind of device they're on, as long as they have internet access and can get to their M365 web page, then they're able to connect to their devices. And it's actually a pretty nice experience for the end user. So when I say that they would connect through their M365 web page, this is what I'm talking about, where you go through the My Apps location when you log into, for example, your Outlook.com or your Teams location or SharePoint or something like that. You get to this page where you have the little checkerboard up here in the corner. And what you'd have available is this Windows 365 icon that you would click on, and then this would show you which PCs you have access to. So let's take a look at what that actually looks like. So this is just a video demo. I'm going to click on it, and we'll kind of walk through this. So the user connects to their cloudpc.microsoft.com. It welcomes them. It shows which devices they have access to. In this case, Christian has access to a single device. He can restart, rename, or troubleshoot. These are the clients that he would use to download to his iOS or Android device to connect. But in this case, he's connecting through the browser. So as you can see, the tab up in the top left corner, he's connected directly to his PC, and this is the experience. He's browsing the internet on his cloud PC. He shrinks it down, and then if he wants to go back to his desktop, he clicks show the desktop, and now he has the ability to interact with any applications on that desktop. So it's a very simple, seamless experience for end users. And remember, this is the web browser version. This is not through the client that's available to Windows users or to Android or iOS users. This is just using a standard web browser. So this is probably the least functional of the experiences for end users, and you saw that it was still a pretty decent experience for them. So that's what the experience is for end users. It's not a very complicated demo, but it is very effective in demonstrating the functionality that they would get. So again, what we want to do is figure out what is the right technology for our specific needs. And this is not an either or scenario in many cases. So some aspects of a business may require an Azure Virtual Desktop, and other parts of the business may choose to go with a Windows 365 PC. So think, for example, about a banking customer. They may require Azure Virtual Desktop to have a very controlled, highly managed desktop for users that are using certain applications that maybe do mortgage loans and stock trading, things like that. And so they want to present the same experience to users every single time. Whereas other people in the bank, people that are maybe just customer service type users, maybe they don't need that same rigid managed experience, and so they could use the Windows 365 PC and have the experience customized to their own liking. So it's not an either or. You can have both in the same environment. So there's a couple of resources here for you to take a look at to get more familiar with some of the options that are available to you. This was really just a very quick high-level overview of what Windows 365 offers and how you would go about approaching the decision of which version to choose. A few of the features that were available at GA, which by now is quite a ways behind us. These are some of the things that were available. And then these are some of the things that have been made available since the initial release. So as you can imagine, since this is a cloud service, it's going to be continually expanded upon and improved for our end users based on their requirements. So Joe, I think this kind of wraps things up. Did you have any last points you wanted to bring up?
Just that, first of all, thank you, Dave, as always. Great content. Adding on the what do you think screen here on the post-webinar survey, a few things. You'll have an opportunity to specifically follow up on some of the topics on today. So specifically, if you want to talk about Windows 365 or Azure Desktop as an example, I will ask a favor as you're filling that out. I'm really looking for input for future events, Microsoft or other. So if you have those, let us know in the feedback forum. With that, again, I want to thank you, Dave, for the great content and everyone for attending today. Continuing, if you have questions, reach out to your New Era rep. Reach out to Dave, if you don't mind going back to the last screen here, you'll see an email address as well. One more, yep. So you can email that address as well with any questions. And we hope to see you on the next event, and everyone have a great Thanksgiving. Take care.